Okay, here we go again. Okay, so I'm gonna start with chapter 4 of Dishwasher by Pete Jordan. That's Dishwasher Pete right there in that picture. I'm just doing some Insomniac reading, so I can't sleep, so I figure I might as well read a few pages of this book. Um, and there's some water sounds in the background. That's the waterfall I put on to when I go to sleep. So, anyways, chapter 4, Fragile. School had already gotten me a few miles out of San Francisco, so I used the experience as a springboard to get me even farther away to see other parts of the country. After scouring a college guidebook for a school that was both cheap and an enticing locale, I found one in Kentucky, a state university that was so desperate to attract students that it had a wide open enrollment. Out of state students were charged the same low tuition as Kentucky residents. Weeks after being canned from the paint crew, I was in Kentucky and in need of a job again. I meandered around town one Friday morning until I saw the marquee sign of one of the Perkins chain restaurants. Dishwasher wanted. The sign didn't necessarily call out to me, but remembering Jack in the Box and how I'd enjoy the dishes, it didn't sound half bad. I went in and filled out the application. When the manager asked if I could start the next day, I told her no. My buddy Phil, only one of two friends I still had from my teen years in San Francisco, would be passing through town that weekend. I can start Monday, though. Come in Monday at 8 a.m., she said. That weekend, Phil and I went on a bender. Monday morning, hungover, I dragged my sore body and aching head over to Perkins, managing to arrive only 20 minutes late. When I entered through the back door, the lone person in sight was a guy washing the dishes. He explained that with my arrival, he was now the old dishwasher. Timmy handed me an apron and described the operation step by step. When the training ended 5 minutes later, Timmy embarked on his new prep cook job, and I embarked on my new dishwasher job. From the pile of dirty dishes, I grabbed a couple of plates. Now what? In my muddled state, I hadn't followed Timmy's instructions. I called him back over. Again, he explained what to wash and where to put things once they were clean. This time, I concentrated. Waitresses, whose faces I couldn't see, only their hands, would shove the dirty dishes through a waist-high hole in one wall. I was to wash the dishes and then shove them through a waist-high hole in another wall to the cooks, whose faces I also couldn't see, just their hands. The only person ever in view was Timmy, who, content in his new position, whistled cheerfully as he chopped vegetables. Each time I cleaned all the awaiting dishes, my queasiness subsided. But then the waitresses would shove through another load and I'd feel ill all over again. As the minutes passed with agonizing slowness, a longing for a well earned meal break kept me going. In the meantime, I scrounged through the meager food scraps and snacked on toast crust and fatty bacon remains. After an hour, it was an accomplishment that I hadn't passed out. But then the faceless waitresses suddenly started yelling, "More silverware! We need more silverware out here!" As instructed by Timmy, I'd been dumping the dirty silverware into a large metal container to let it soak. The cutlery lay at the bottom of the container, under about 18 inches of hot water. The water was too scorching for my bare hands, so I donned some gloves. But the gloves were too short to reach all the way down. Tongs weren't long enough either. I tried to pour the water out, but the container was somehow affixed to the wall. Then I tried to bail the water out, but the container was too narrow for a soup ladle. After 10 minutes of futile attempts at problem solving, I called Timmy over. "How do you get the silverware out?" I asked. "You pull it out," he said, and then he plunged his arm into the hot water. His face lit up, his mouth popped open, and his arm shot back out. He shook it around wildly to numb the pain, and when he finally stopped, I was horrified to see his beet red arm. It looked like it was starting to welt. When he caught his breath, Timmy calmly said, "Somebody must have put hot water in there." Then he returned to his vegetables. "Where's the silverware?" cried the faceless waitress, their hands frantically waving through the little high waist high hole. "We need more silverware." I was at a complete loss. During the time I'd spent trying to recover the silverware, I'd washed nothing else. So then the faceless cooks poked their hands through the other hole. "Plates! We need plates now!" It felt like all the menacing waitresses and cooks were going to crawl through their holes to get me. When the room began to spin, I knew there was no way I could survive until a meal break. My calling? This? I pulled off my apron and laid it like a shroud over the stack of dishes. I gotta go, I told Timmy. Shit, he sighed. Guess I'm back to dishing. Sorry, I said. As I stumbled home, I vomited up the bacon and toast scraps into some bushes. A couple of days later, I was hired to work in a warehouse that stored the university's old desks, chairs, typewriters, and other supplies. My lack of qualifications perfectly prepared me for the job. Almost all I ever did was sit at a counter and read. Once a week, a truck would drop off some old desks, and I'd find space for them in the warehouse. Then I'd resume my reading. If anything, this seemed like a calling. Though I was able to use the 4 months at the warehouse job to read 26 Mark Twain books in a row, I made no friends and got lonely. Before long, I was back in San Francisco, living in my friend Carl's basement apartment, less than 100 feet from the apartment I grew up in. Well, so much for traveling and seeing the nation. I made the most of my circumstances by pulling out my old marked up map of San Francisco and reviving my attempt to cover every street in the city by foot. Carl got me hired at the UPS warehouse on Potrero Hill, where he was working loading trucks in the middle of the night. My new job was simple yet bewildering. As the packages wound their way to the building on a series of chutes and conveyor belts, they passed the rear of the parked trucks. Loaders would pull out the packages to place them in the proper trucks. If the packages on one particular conveyor belt had found their way into the wrong belt or had been missed by a preoccupied loader, then they'd reach the end of the conveyor belt and plunge 6 feet to the floor. My sole task was to pluck these forlorn packages from the floor, wheel them on a cart to the head of the conveyor belt, and place them back for another go round. By the time I returned to the far end of the conveyor belt, a new pyramid of fallen parcels would be awaiting me on the floor. If a fallen box was damaged, I was expected to try to smooth out its dented sides. Though I wasn't asked to shake each package to listen for broken contents, I took it upon myself to do so anyway. The packages that rattled most were usually those that looked to have been most carefully wrapped, with fragile written innocently on the outside. So why couldn't a table at the end of the conveyor belt catch the packages? Or better yet, why not a little slide installed to glide the packages down to the cart? Or best yet, a circular conveyor belt that sent the parcels around and around like an airport baggage carousel. Well, UPS didn't pay me to think. It paid me to plod back and forth with the dented packages, grunt work any numbskull could handle. Or so I thought. One night at 3 a.m., I arrived to start my shift. On my way to the conveyor belt, I was called into the supervisor's office. We need to talk about your work performance, he said. Oh? Yeah, you're not cut out for working here. You have a lack of enthusiasm for your work. Enthusiasm? I pick up smushed boxes off the floor. What was there to be excited about? Well, I never found out because as an ex-employee, I didn't stick around to meet my more enthusiastic replacement. A couple of weeks later, Carl asked for half of my rent. I was flat broke and unemployed. He was pretty pissed to hear that I couldn't pay up. Take it easy, I told him. I'm going to find a job right now. I left the apartment intending to wander around the neighborhood long enough for Carl to cool off. I had no clue how an unskilled, unkempt, and unmotivated man was to find work. By looking through the newspaper classifieds? If I wasn't even qualified to pick up packages off a floor, then I definitely wasn't qualified for any of those jobs that demanded experience. By sending out a resume? What employer wouldn't love to read a resume from someone kicked out of college, fired from several shit jobs, and with a peculiar talent for sitting and reading for hours on end without complaint? After I had strolled 3 blocks from Carl's apartment, a sign in a cafe window caught my attention. Dishwasher wanted. I stepped inside and inquired about the position. The boss guy asked if I could start in the morning. I could. That was it. I was hired. There's just 2 things, he said. First, you can eat or drink whatever you want, except the beer and the wine. Okay, now I'm at page 34. And I'll stop now.